Hello, this is Truth Be Told Transformation, and I'm Bonnie Burkert, here to share tools for transformation, to live your highest truth. One thing that's true for me is that I love to contemplate the energies of the earth, and I think that fairies factor into it. Fairies are something, as much as I love the magical world, I can't say I know that much about fairies. So to learn more, for me and for you, I've invited to the show today, Storm Faerywolf. Welcome, Storm.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's so great. I mean, how could I not want to speak to a gentleman with a name called Storm Faerywolf? Will you please tell me where you got this magical name?
Well, of course, I practice witchcraft, and it's customary within the craft to take on a magical name for various purposes. Maybe based on elements of nature or dreams, something that's aspirational, perhaps from mythology. My name came from a series of dreams that I had, very powerful dreams in my late teens and 20s, and actually growing, all through my childhood, actually going back, when I realized, oh yeah, I've been having these reoccurring dreams. They were these very powerful dreams that really spoke to me on a spiritual level. And so in one of the dreams, I was a wolf, running up a mountain and howling at the moon. And another dream, I was actually lifted up by a tornado, by this huge storm. And in that dream in particular, it was terrifying. Getting snatched up by a tornado would be pretty terrifying. And I thought, I'm going to die. And I just surrendered to it because I thought, oh, that's it. I'm going to die. And then all of the wind and the rain and the lightning and the hail just flew into my body, and I was gently let down on the ground. And then I just felt that I was embodying this power. And when I woke up, I was buzzing, so that's how I took on the name Storm. But it was a few different experiences in my life that really led me to do this. And the reason that I did it, of course, is because I've made a pledge to live a magical life and to act as a resource, as a public warlock. And so here I am. I definitely, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, there's no other job I could have.
I know, that's fantastic. I mean, I think the world's opening up, so you might be wrong. I mean, you could certainly be a podcast host, which you are, by the way, right?
That's true. True.
What's the name of your podcast while I bring it up?
Witch Power Daily.
Okay, I can't wait to check that out.
There's currently 30 episodes. I'm threatening to do a season 2 at some point, but I'm Pisces and ADHD probably. So, it's a little of this, little of that. Well, stay tuned.
I'm Pisces too, and thank you for better explaining the ADHD. That would explain my life. It's especially while scrolling through social media. It's like you're there to do one thing, and an hour later, it's like, how did I get down this rabbit hole?
Exactly.
So, Storm, I want to point out to people what you just talked about with the dream, right, and the potency of a dream, because I think I believe any listener of this show is open to higher consciousness. I think that's really what I work with. Higher consciousness, energy. So pay attention to the dreams, right? I mean, this is what I want to glean from what Storm just said. I think that, you didn't just say, wow, that was a nightmare. You looked at it. Well, and it was a nightmare. In a lot of ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. For the vast majority of that storm dream, it was a nightmare. It was stressful.
But you took it as a message as well. And so you distilled it. Some people might have just been disturbed, period, and forgotten about it or talked to their friends about it. But you really worked with it. And, bravo for the courage, as well as, I would say, maybe the intuition to delve more deeply into it.
Well, I will say, in all fairness, the dream did end well. So, it ended with me feeling empowered and I was safe, so that was probably a little easier to look at it as a message. If it had ended with me probably dying in the tornado, I'm not sure how I would have responded to it, to be honest. But yeah, taking it all together, I realized, oh, this is a message. Now, of course, I also believe that dreams often are messages, if nothing else, a message from our subconscious. And so I tend to, even if it's just a nightmare, I do tend to look at it and say, what's the potential message for me, in this? And that's part of, I would think, dare I say, any which is, spiritual practice, we should be looking at our dreams, if nothing else, just to say, what's going on in my brain?
Yes, absolutely. What are we clearing? Well, and I'm just going to, quick tip and words of encouragement. Try to jot down the dream as quickly as you can. I try not to turn on light, but sometimes I will if in the middle of the night something happened, or you can maybe record it to your phone and then transcribe in the morning. But try to grab that. There's a lot of information there. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So Storm. Okay, the storm. You talked about wind. You talked about rain, the elements. Now, help me understand about fairies as it pertains to nature, natural forces, elemental forces, please.
So fairies, it really kind of depends on how we're going to define that term, because everything fairy is very blurry. It's very nebulous. It's kind of my favorite word, right? Things blur into the next. It's all about a liminal expression, a liminal experience. Mm-hmm. So how I work with fairy, is I take that as more of the original definition, which meant things of magic and enchantment. So often today we will think, fairies, we think of Ireland, we think of Wales, we think of very specific beings. However, what Europeans often referred to as fairies, we can see all over the world. In every indigenous culture, there are beings of power. They're weird. Usually we're cautioned against them, at least to a degree, more so, of course, in Christian era, than previously. But they were always kind of recognized world over. So to me, fairy represents the magically weird, it feels alien. There is definitely that uncanny feeling that we would have when we're having a fairy encounter. So it's more than just the little people in Ireland, right? Although that's one expression of fairy. And it's more than just elemental spirits. A lot of people think, fairies are the spirits of nature. They're the spirits of the flowers and the trees. And that's one type of fairy. Okay. That would definitely be one type of fairy, but there's so many others and they all kind of go underneath that umbrella.
Okay. Helpful. This is an area that I am very, very curious and I can't quite get my arms around it, but once upon a time, I thought astrology would elude me, and now I'm, super immersed in that. So I think there's a chance, and you find the right teacher, such as yourself, to help us know. So, this is a chance for me to ask you about one of your books, because it'll read into the story. And just so you know, I titled our show, what we're talking about is folklore and practice of fairy magic. So I love going back. You mentioned Ireland. I did not realize that something like a fairy, and I think there's different maybe terms for it. Obviously, it would be different languages, but in different parts of the country. So, the world. So more indigenous understandings
and even different parts of the country, because we have all these different regional expressions too. If we're looking at just here in the United States, there are many different Native American tribes that have their own lore about the little people. And sometimes they're not always little either.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask, because I think we often associate fairies as being tiny, like Tinkerbell.
Right. And this really comes out more of like Victorian era. Yeah. So this is kind of like they're revisiting some of that older lore, and now it gets kind of filtered through the lens of romanticism. Yes. And also through the lens of environmentalism, because, there was a huge environmental movement in the 19th century, and so fairies got kind of attached to that. So did the Greek god Pan, that got kind of romanticized and revitalized in terms of the mythology, connecting to environmentalism, so we see this evolution in how modern culture relates to the magical and to the weird and the mythological. And it shifts over time, as it should, because of course our consciousness is shifting, all the time. So in order to really look at, what is fairy, we have to kind of look at the whole thing and take it all together and not just one little piece.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's already, sort of, setting off light bulbs in my head here a little bit with different understanding. And I love that you kind of went back and looked at different eras and their acknowledgement of fairies. So kind of the Victorian era. And I'm already seeing like different art, sort of the visualization of art and how we've held on to that still. Now, what is so tell me your understanding of it though. So you probably... tell me your trajectory. I don't know what came first. As far as your understanding of the craft, of witchcraft, what were some of the things that tipped you off? And then how did you come to specialize? Because you are, I did not make a note of this, but you are a king of fairies. No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I don't mean to say that, but
that's going to get me in trouble.
I know. I couldn't resist. I was trying not to say it. I'm like, it's just too good. But please, tell me a little bit, because it seems like this has become a area of specialization for you, and I'd like to know how that came to be.
Well, honestly, I first thought of witchcraft when I was a very little boy, and that was because I was watching reruns of Bewitched. And I know a lot of people think, oh, that's so silly or whatever. And it is. It's ridiculous, but I love it. It was still a gateway, right? It opened me up. And when I was 2 years old, I told my mom I was going to grow up and be a witch. And she's just like, oh, that's nice, dear. Whatever, go play. But that always stuck with me. I always was very drawn to the magical, to the fantastical, in part because, especially through my mother, we were very fiercely proud of our Irish American heritage. And so, my mom is, more than half Irish. She was raised on stories of the little people and the banshee. And of course, she passed that along to me, when I was very little. And so I always had that sense that, magic was real and that it was in the world and that it was something that we could touch. And then, of course, I was born in 71, so growing up in the 70s, everything culturally was so aligned to like ESP,
yes,
UFOs, magic, and occultism. And I remember those old, I'm dating myself now, but those old Time Life books that they used to have on like every aspect of the paranormal.
I have one actually. I think it's Dreams.
They're so cool.
Dreams and Dreaming. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Items now. Those are awesome. I have a few of them that I've been able to scrounge up. But
wonderful.
I remember there was one that was like on witches and witchcraft, and I was just fascinated. And not only did it go into like early mythology concerning witches, but through the witch trials, of course, that's where we get a lot of that. What now we consider as traditional imagery of the witch. A lot of it comes out of the Inquisition and the witch trials. But they also had modern practitioners as well. And I remember this photograph of these people wearing white robes out in the daylight on a grassy hill in a circle. And it just fascinated me. It was like, there's people actually doing this, right? And that's what really clued me into, oh, this is a possibility, in terms of an actual practice. It's not just something that, oh, maybe you want to do, but have no connection with. I realized there's actually a community of people out there that are doing exactly this. And so I want to get involved. When I was 14, I formally dedicated myself to the craft, mostly to Diana, goddess of the moon.
Okay.
Diana was my first goddess. During that time, I also felt a masculine presence. And there was kind of a force of darkness, not in the sense of like, ooh, oogie boogie scary, but just like literal darkness, right? The lights are out, the moon is out, it's nighttime, it's dark. And I felt it very comforting. And it was surprising because that was not something that I was expecting to be aligned to. So that was something that also kind of drove me deeper in my studies of the craft, was realizing that, oh, there was so much to learn and there was so much outside of my expectation, that could happen. And so that really just kind of fueled the fire. And so from then, I've just continued to study everything I get my hands on. I was able to find actual traditions, working covens that I got trained and initiated into. And then finally, I read a book that kind of changed my whole trajectory. And that was The Spiral Dance by a witch by the name of Starhawk.
Sure.
published in 79. And she was an initiate of the Faery tradition. Often today we refer to it as Faery, Feri, or Anderson Faery.
Okay.
And there was something in it that just clicked with me. It's like, oh, that's it. That's the stuff. It felt like I was coming home, like my blood was singing for it, but I couldn't find anybody who was teaching it. Right. And so I just kind of put that on the back burner. I was like, okay, well, when it is time, if it's meant to be, it'll happen. And several years later, I had an acquaintance friend who said, oh, there's this fairy teacher in Berkeley, California. You might want to check this out. I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up taking a class with her. And then that led me to finding somebody else who ended up being my actual teacher and initiator. I trained for about 5.5 years, close to 6 years, mostly weekly meetings, with my teacher. We would do a lot of trance. We would do a lot of ritual energy work. And then finally I earned my initiation. And that is really kind of the biggest thing. I've been initiated into several different versions, I will say, of the craft, but it's really Faery tradition that really spoke to me the most. And it's pretty much within that loose framework that I work the craft today.
Can you tell me some of the distinctions? Well, before I ask that question, tell me your title as an initiate.
I mean, an initiate, but I also possess the Black Wand, which is an honorific. It comes with the title either Master or Grandmaster, depending on which lineage you're in. I usually just say Fairy Master because that's, I don't know, it seems less weird. Yeah, but that was something that I actually received from two people, from Anar, who is the current Grandmaster of the Anderson Faery tradition, but I also received it from Cora Anderson, one of the founders, about a year before she passed away. And so that is a definite fierce honor. I just feel so blessed that I was able to receive that honorific from them. I also received it from another person from a different lineage as well, to kind of combine it together. So I feel very, very blessed. Not every lineage of Anderson Faery even recognizes the Black Wand or any of the colored wands, and that's okay. It doesn't give me any additional authority. It just gives me additional responsibility. Beautiful. So I see myself, because I hold this wand, I consider myself a priest for the priesthood. Yes. And so I am a public resource of the craft.
That's so great. Thank you. And mad respect for your work. I mean, it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So can you tell us some of the distinctions between the study of fairy witchcraft and Wicca?
I will preface this by saying everything that I'm saying about fairy witchcraft pertains specifically to what has been called Anderson Faery tradition, which is a specific lineage tradition. There's a lot of other versions of fairy witchcraft out there that might have nothing to do with what I'm doing. So it can be, I heard it described as a marketing nightmare, the name of our tradition, and they're not wrong. But in short, if we're looking at something like Wicca, a lot of people are familiar with Wicca, public pagan witchcraft. And in general, Wicca tends to approach divinity roughly as a gender binary. You have a goddess and a god. There's a lot of sexual polarity that is represented within Wicca. Not always, but in fairy tradition, we don't have any gender roles. And in fact, our goddess, and I'm putting that in air quotes, is really androgynous. And they are the ultimate source of all. Sometimes we refer to them as God herself. And so this is kind of, I've heard it described as pre-gender. And then our God, who is also most often called the blue god, or Gianni Glass, he is considered to be post-gender. And so tip of the hat to Fairy Initiate T. Thorn Coyle for that description. That always stuck with me. I believe that was in their book, Evolutionary Witchcraft. So if listeners are interested, they could pick up a copy of that book on Amazon or their local metaphysical shop. But because of that, we don't really have that gender polarity, going on. We don't have to circle up boy, girl, And that's happening a lot less now in public pagan spaces. But certainly when I was first coming into the craft, that was very strict. And so there was even a debate, can gay men even participate, in the craft? Because, they're not exactly real men, are they? Again, 70s and 80s, right? Faery tradition really doesn't have any of that. We are definitely, instead of being based in the gender polarity or in fertility, we tend to be based more in ecstasy. So it's all about shifting our consciousness. Trance work seems to be paramount in Faery tradition. It's all about going into an altered state of awareness and then communing with the spirits. And I would say that's probably the big difference. But even to say it's a difference, it's a little blurry, because even Wicca, deals with the ecstatic, and they don't necessarily have to do the gender polarity thing like they used to do. So, yeah. But Faery tradition tends to be a little less structured. A lot of people will say it's more wild. I certainly found that to be true in my experience, but I also believe that people will gravitate towards the type of magic that they're aligned to. Yes. And so whereas I don't necessarily feel a lot of power in Wicca or Gardnerian, craft, I have plenty of friends that do align to that, and that's where they feel the power. I'm assuming they wouldn't really feel it much in Faery, so I think everybody finds where they need to, plant their roots. To me, with Wicca, nature plays a major role, right? The seasons, the moon, certainly. Absolutely. Spirits of trees and sun and birds and power animals. I mean, I think maybe I'm mixing, mashing in a little shamanism in with that too. But I thought with fairies, I also have a strong nature association. Is that accurate? I mean, I think that it is. It's not solely focused on that. Okay. I kind of see Faery as being the nature behind nature. It's the hidden kingdom. It's the spirit, the hidden spirit that exists within matter, right? And so I think that when we have a fairy encounter, and it can feel very alien, feel very weird. I remember there was a time, there were these fairy retreats that we used to do in Missouri, and I had met another fairy teacher for the first time, and we went off one night while people were drumming. We went off on this little walk, and not too far away from where people were drumming. But I remember there was these tall grasses and these paths, and we just turned a corner, and it felt like the pressure changed. It was like there was a shift, and the air grew a little cooler, and we could no longer hear the drumming or see the firelight, from where the drum was. And we're like, wait a minute, it's not like we walked miles away. We literally just turned this one corner in the grass. And we both have this sense that like, oh, something weird is going on. It just that, your spidey sense, right? It kind of starts tingling. Uh-huh. And we recognized that we were being fairy led, which is this traditional term for when the fairies kind of lure you kind of away. And there is all this documentation of these experiences where people will be fairy led, and they'll be in a place that they know very well, and yet they're lost, And so we recognize this. Oh, okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and keep going, and we're going to keep having our conversation. And so we did. And at some point, I do recall that we had this idea that like, oh, in traditional lore, they say if you're being fairy led, you should basically like if you're wearing a jacket, take off your jacket, turn it inside out, and then put it back on. And that's supposed to break the enchantment. And so we did that. And then we turned a corner, and then suddenly we could hear the drumming again, and we could see the firelight. We made our way back. And we're like, that was just weird. We never felt threatened, but it was weird, right? And we kind of felt like, oh, well, we needed to get away from everything, and we needed to get to know each other a little bit more, talk about our fairy experiences. Yeah. And so we kind of felt the fairies were just assisting us with that. Interesting. So you could have potentially kept going. I mean, have you had other experiences like that you felt fairy led and you just went for it? Or did you, is when one has a sensation of something like that, and maybe you don't know for sure what's going on, but you suspect, better to stop that? Is it better? I mean, I think probably for most people, people would probably want to stop it because it can feel disturbing.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've worked with fairy for so long, I don't really find it disturbing. It's so much a part of who I am now that I will just take it at face value. I'm like, okay, obviously I'm supposed to be here. So if it's me, I'm probably just going to keep going, unless it's like, well, I really do need to get back now. So maybe now I'm going to turn my jacket inside out, and it's time for me to be done. But I'm always kind of thinking, well, what are they here to show me?
Yes.
Because my work is all about working with the fairy realm, and because I do believe that humans and fairies, we have such an intimate relationship and it's reciprocal. And it's so needed, especially now in this time of environmental crisis. The fairies live here, they're here on this planet with us, and maybe just in another dimension, if you will. And, but there is an intimate relationship between human and fae. Even traditionally, we see that there's a huge connection between the fairy and the human dead. There are so many instances in folklore where someone's talking to a fairy being and then they're like, oh, wait a minute, you're actually Susie who died like 2 months ago and the next parish over. What's going on? Mm-hmm. And this kind of also plays a role in some of the euphemistic names that are given to fairies, the fair ones. Often they're described as being white or pale, but not necessarily just meaning Caucasian. They're like white like a corpse, right? Yeah. And so there is this intimate relationship between the dead, the human dead and the fairy. And there is this idea that perhaps, we're kind of just like that. We are, perhaps when humans die, we are reborn, as fairies. And then maybe when a fairy dies, they are reborn as a human. And I don't necessarily think that's across the board, for everybody. But there is this idea that, fairies they're the souls of the pagan dead, right? Not good enough to go to heaven, not bad enough to go to hell. So they're just here on earth. And this is obviously from Christian era that we get this. But I think there might be a little something to it. Just in my own work, I kind of do feel there's this human fairy alliance that really is necessary, to helping humanity in modern times spiritualize our relationship to nature and to recognize that we are not separate from nature, And so that's at least the crux to my work, is trying to help people to understand that there are these other beings here, these magical beings, and they can help us if we enter into a respectful and reciprocal relationship with them.
Storm, this is great. Do you, why don't you read off your, would you mention your website for the listener?
Oh, sure. You can find me at faerywolf.com. I'll spell that. That's FAERY wolf.com. And that's where I post, a lot of different, I post articles. I have art, that I have made inspired from my work in fairy tradition. I offer services to the public. I offer classes. Our other main website would be modernwitchuniversity.com, and that's where we offer our online classes, including our Black Rose Witchcraft course, which is kind of a year-long course. Lessons drop each week, but that also gives people a good primer in not specifically working with fairies, but kind of getting prepared for that. It's giving people basic witchcraft tools to work with spirits, to clear their own energy, to cast spells, all of the above. Between those two websites, and there's a few other websites we do as well.
Well, you've got, your website's beautiful. So I wanted to make sure that the way you're describing everything, and, it's going through my mind, well, how do I conjure a fairy? And so I wanted to give your information should anybody wish to work with you to learn how to do this. So at this point in the conversation, I wanted to, it was going through my mind. So I'm not going to ask you that specific question, because I think that takes a foundation, right? And development. And I think, over time, and maybe you need people to read your books to better learn how to do it. So I'm going to go back to I'd like to talk to you about the forbidden mysteries of fairy witchcraft, just because there's a little bit of a shadow side to that one, right? I mean, we're talking about shadow, and we are, at the time of taping, we are in October, and it's that time of year. Right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm welcoming. It's great. It's the dream time. And so let's talk about what kind of forbidden mysteries might one want to explore in your book.
So the term, I use that term very specifically. You're talking, of course, about my second book on the fairy tradition called Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft,
yes,
published through Llewellyn Worldwide. I chose that term specifically because that is a traditional term. Forbidden mysteries really just refers to witchcraft, because really the idea of witchcraft, it's the forbidden knowledge, right? It's the knowledge that the church and the state don't want you to have because it is self-empowering. And so forbidden mysteries, it sounds really scary, but it really can just be, it could be the knowledge of herbs, right? If I have the knowledge of herbs, then I don't need your sanctioned doctor necessarily. I will say, as a footnote to that, if you're ever experiencing any health issues, you should absolutely see a medical professional and not just rely on magic and herbs necessarily. But especially if we're talking about the time of the witch trials and stuff, specifically, this was a political move. There were a lot of women who were healers, who were midwives and had this knowledge of the herbs, but the growing medical movement, later to become an industry, was threatened by that. And so women weren't allowed.
The medical movement,
doctors.
Which employed men only, exclusively.
Only men. Absolutely.
Just saying.
So this was a political, thing. So it was forbidden. And we see a lot of that happening even today. Dare I get a little political, but today in the United States, this backlash against women's reproductive rights, this is absolutely horrible, but it's the same type of thing. It's based in capitalism. It's based in repressive right-wing religiosity. And it always comes back to this war against women, and so, yeah, I'm losing my train of thought. ADHD.
Yeah, we're right. No, not at all.
I'm going off on a tangent.
And that could be its own show right there. But no, we're talking.
If I am a king, like you said, I'm a king of tangents. So.
I know. But I think we're just talking about working with shadow a little bit, and right. And so, and an understanding of that not having to necessarily be scary or
evil.
Thank
you. So, yeah, that book in particular is about, as you described, the shadow work, within fairy tradition, which I think obviously within fairy work, but witchcraft, and really I would think any viable introspective spiritual path would give us a modality for working with the shadow in that Jungian sense, right? Of there are all these things in our subconscious, perhaps that we don't like about ourselves or we don't accept about ourselves, that we will push down and deny. But that doesn't mean that they go away. They're festering in our subconscious. And so shadow work is a practice that allows us to bring the light of consciousness into the darkness of our subconscious in order to see, hey, first of all, what the heck is living there? And then what can I do about it? And not to banish it, because our shadow is still us. It's still our life force, our wraith force. And so what we want to do is we want to embrace it. We want to heal it. And so that's a lot of the work in fairy tradition, is about embracing our shadow, confronting our inner demons, right? And either transforming those quote unquote demons, into something positive, or if we feel like they're too powerful for us to simply transform, then we give them a new job. It's like, well, because a lot of those inner demons actually came to us in the guise of self-protection. It was something perhaps that served us when we were a child or a teen, but that modality of thinking no longer serves. In fact, it detracts now, from our path. And so we might need to go in there and say, oh, hey, demon, you were here to protect me for this, but I don't actually need that anymore. So we're going to redirect you. And so that's a bunch of the work in that book, is talking about working with our own inner demons and being able to, if not transform them outright, then to reassign them, give them a new job, make that affirmation. Hey, demon, You work for me now, right?
Cool.
And so, but I think that really is at the heart of the craft. And again, spirituality. We need to understand what's going on in our shadow. We can't just deny it, because what we keep denying will eventually have power over us. And so we need to confront our fear. We need to look it right in the eye. I mean, that was a lesson I received from my mom as a little kid, right? I was afraid of the dark, and I'd be afraid of the monster, hanging out of the closet. And she would make me, without turning on the lights, she'd make me get up from bed and walk across the room and reach out and touch that monster, to then realize it's my raincoat, hanging on a hook, right? But through that confrontation of fear, we grab our power back from it. And that is really such a huge thing in fairy witchcraft. It's about confronting our fear and looking into the abyss and taking our power back from that.
Oh, it's so great. Your mom sounds wonderful. I just love that she nurtured that she nurtured this. It's a beautiful story to hear. And I like the raincoat specifically. It's very funny. This seems like every kid has a raincoat in the closet story,
I know. It's almost cliche, right? But there's a reason that that's powerful, right? It's this almost common experience that we have. If we do confront the fear, then we realize, oh, that wasn't scary at all. It was like the first time I took swimming classes when I was a kid, and in the final class, we had to jump off the high dive.
Oh.
And I froze.
Yeah.
I could not do it. And that lifeguard teacher, I don't know if this would be legal today, but he climbed up after me and he picked me up and he threw me off of the high dive into the pool. But once that had happened, I was like, oh my God, this is the best. And I was just up that ladder and jumping all day. But I needed someone to push me.
Yes, I understand.
Right? I had to confront that fear.
Yeah. I mean, I've even had an example way more subtle than that, but I think it's great. And I love that it was a positive experience. But it was a yoga teacher getting me deeper into a posture. And nowadays they probably don't, they don't really have teachers guiding you physically in the same way. But he got me into a twist that I don't think I would have ever, lock that I could have ever gotten to. In my mind, I didn't think I could, but he guided me. So we need those people to push us a little further. And that's it. One of my last interviews, we had a conversation about teachers, and there's a big movement about guru is you. But I think there is also something to be said for those people that are further down the path than you and have
absolutely
life. Right.
I think that's actually really important, and it's something that I think, as you're implying, it's culturally kind of gone by the wayside to some degree. This idea, all the answers are in you. Well, yeah, I think most of the answers are in you, but I think that there is something to be said about somebody that just has a different life experience and the perspective that they can bring. None of us have it all, and even, I've been doing this for many years, more than my vanity will allow me to count right now. And, but I consider myself perpetually a student, because I think to do otherwise is the height of hubris, and it really cuts us off from learning more. And that's something about the craft that I just love. There's always something more to learn. There's always something different around the corner, over the horizon. If we just keep studying, we just keep working, we keep doing it. And if we keep listening to other people, maybe especially those people that on the surface we don't agree with, but I think it's really important to hear those stories. We can still disagree with them at the end of the day, but at least I've been exposed to a new idea, to the idea that somebody else might come to a completely different conclusion than I've come to. Because again, we all have our own different life experiences that are coloring our view of reality today. And that's really important to keep in mind.
It's so great. Storm, let's talk about your book, Betwixt and Between.
So that was my first book on fairy, my first traditionally published book. Subtitle is Exploring the Faery Tradition of Witchcraft. This is my love letter to the Anderson fairy tradition. Okay. I wanted to create kind of a snapshot of what my experience with learning this tradition was and with teaching this tradition. The book is basically a primer. If people want to start, studying a fairy styled witchcraft or spirituality, then this book will give them the tools to do so. I don't make the claim that this is the one way to practice Anderson Faery tradition. This is just one way amongst many different teachers, initiates, covens and lineages will have their own takes on some of these traditional materials. But I wanted there to be something out there that I thought was also positive. There's been a lot of contention within the fairy community, over the years. And I wanted there to be something that people could point to and say, oh, here's some positive work, that anybody can do, And so if you're drawn to fairy tradition, definitely this book would give you the history, basic practices, mythology, poetry, all of that, in order to get an idea of at least one style, of Anderson Faery. But I will also encourage people to pick up as many other books from different authors as they can, to get a different perspective, because of course this isn't just the Storm Show. This is all us trying to weave our perspectives together to try to figure out for ourselves what's going to work for me as an individual.
That's great.
And my work isn't necessarily going to work for everybody. And I recognize that.
That's great. Great advice, though. While I've got you, you've got 2 other books, correct?
Yeah, I have a few other.
Do you have others?
Books. I have two others with Llewellyn, and then I have 4 that are self-published.
All right. Tell us about the Llewellyn books.
So the next one in line would be The Witch's Name.
Witch's Name.
And that one, I talk about how I came to my name. I give a more in-depth story about that. Okay. But also just the idea of taking on a name, in witchcraft. Why might we do this? And why is it actually a powerful practice? With a name like Storm Faerywolf, I've certainly gotten a lot of flack from people, a lot of judgment. A lot of people say, oh, he's just ridiculous. I can't take him seriously with a name like that. I'm not asking anyone to take me seriously. If you're not aligned, if you're not gravitating to my work, then maybe my work isn't for you, and that's fine. And a name like Storm Faerywolf kind of creates a bit of a filter. If you're just honestly not able to look beyond that, then I don't think we could work together. And that's fine. So it's a good filter, right?
It's quite simple. Yeah.
I also think that, for me, taking on that name, again, it's a reminder that, I live in the world, but I'm not of it. It's reminding me that my job is to be a priest of the craft, first and foremost, 24/7. This isn't a hobby. This isn't something I just do on the weekends or on Instagram. This is how I live my life. And so for me, that was a religious commitment. And so I talk about that in that book. I talk about just the power of names in general, how when we name something, we have some degree of power over it. We see that a lot in talk therapy. Once we are able to name our problem, it no longer seems so daunting. Now I have a way to interact with it. And also talking about, magic words, coming up with, spoken words to trigger certain magical effects. So that's all covered, in The Witch's Name.
Oh, excellent.
And then my next book after that is The Satyr's Kiss, which is specifically for queer men, although I've heard from a lot of women and trans people that they have found it useful as well. It's really looking at the idea of building what I call a queer craft. So drawing from queer history, looking at figures in our queer history and relating to them as what we might call the mighty dead, which is people who have passed on, who we can connect to spiritually, today. And also sex magic, because I really felt strongly that, especially with queer men, sex between men has been demonized, by the overculture for so long. And one of the things that I really wanted to put forward is, no, this is sacred. Sex between men is sacred, just as sex between a man and a woman is sacred or can be sacred. And so I wanted to put forward some ideas of how you could incorporate that into magical ritual. But also providing non-sexual methodologies as well, because not everybody is going to want to include sex, in their spiritual practice, and that's fine too. We shouldn't be forced to do that. So that one in particular has really gotten a lot of play, as you can imagine. Sex sells, I guess, and but I'm really touched that people have found it to be useful. I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback about it. Not all of it's positive, but there you go. It's not going to be work for everybody. You can always check my reviews on Amazon and see what some of the 1 stars are having to say about it too. That's always enjoyable.
It's great. You're doing wonderful work here. And I know I checked out your workshops. I know you've got an upcoming event in Santa Cruz.
Yes.
It will be on October 19th, correct?
Yes. There was a little Instagram flub, I guess. They were switching the dates between the 19th and 20th. I think mine is the 19th, but my partners are also going to be doing events there on the flanking nights, so the 18th and the 20th as well. You can check out Moonkissed in Santa Cruz, and that's where it's being held. But you can also go to my website and click on events, and it'll give you a link to how you could register for that. But I'm going to be leading a journey to the fairy realm, and with the express idea of that we're going to hopefully meet a fairy ally that then people can work with on their own afterwards. So it's one of the workshops that I've done for years. Gotten a lot of really positive feedback about it. And so I'm excited again to be now presenting this in person again. I've been doing a lot of online stuff since the pandemic started, but I'm now just kind of sticking my toe back into the water, starting to do some traveling and teaching again. So really looking forward.
It's wonderful, Storm. No, it's great. You're doing such cool work. This is very fascinating. It's specialized. I've done over 100 episodes. You're my first that has come on to talk about the fairies. There's some subtleties there. We're talking different dimensions, different energies that I think are age old. Tune in. Who knows what you might listen and hear. And by a chance of learning more about what Storm has to offer, maybe you would know how to work with those fairy allies, right? They're not, are they tricksters, the fairies? Are they?
So that's interesting. They often get accused of being tricksters, but I think that in reality, or to put a finer point on it, it's not so much that they are tricksters, but they are alien to us. They do not possess a human morality in the same way. And so on the surface, I think they can look like tricksters, but I think that they're very specific. There is this idea that to engage with a fairy, you might be entering into some type of contract. And so you want to be very clear what that fine print is on that contract before you enter into anything. Some of the old pre-Christian stories about fairies still were warning you about working with them. And of course, that became even more so, when Christianity came about. But a lot of the magic traditionally in folklore that is about fairies is how to protect yourself from them. Because, again, they are so alien to human consciousness. And you might lose yourself, they kind of get swept up in their current. But the thing is, I don't think everybody should be working with fairies. But I do think that those people who identify as witches or warlocks, whatever, I think whether we think we're working with them or not, we are. And so I think doing it consciously is the best choice. And so that's where a lot of my work comes from. It's if you're already doing witchcraft, you're kind of already working with the fae. So maybe you should do it consciously and in a respectful way. And here's one way to do that.
Okay, that's really great. So it's just basically fine-tuning one's practice, knowing your tools,
Absolutely.
If you're going to use them, and if you want to transform through them. Well, this has been fascinating. I feel like there's so much more to talk about, so I think you should come back sometime. But until then, I send you my very best from Burbank, California, and you're further north in California, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Antioch, which is the legal edge of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right on. Well, no, it's great, and I look forward to learning more about your work for sure, Storm. Thanks again, and blessed Samhain, soon to be, right?
Yes, so, blessed Samhain.
Enjoy the season. Thank you so much.
You as well. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation for me and hopefully for you, too. It's Bonnie Burkert here for Truth Be Told Transformation and part of the Club Paranormal Network. You can hear us also where you listen to podcasts on Truth Be Told Paranormal, right? And I'm looking at Tony here in the studio, making sure I get things right. You can hear Tony Sweet every Friday, 3 p.m. live. So get over to the YouTube channel and say hi to the community. Robert Hensley's got lots to offer as well, with new episodes every week, as well as Queer from the Other Side. They've got a new show as well. So watch for them. Again, Club Paranormal on YouTube. Please follow, like, share, love, and until the next time, shine on.